The boy was 7 years old when his mother told him she loved him too much to keep him, and those words would haunt every corner of his existence for the next 2 decades. Montana City sprawled across the territorial landscape in 1873 like a promise half kept, its dusty streets lined with clapboard buildings that leaned toward each other as if sharing secrets. The Montana sun beat down mercilessly on the wagon trains that rolled through, on the miners who still dreamed of gold despite the dwindling yields, and on the boy named Ethan Bradford, who stood outside the general store clutching his mother's hand for what he did not know would be the last time. His mother, whose name he would later struggle to remember without pain, knelt beside him that morning. Her dress was threadbare, her face gaunt from months of rationing what little food they could afford. She cupped his face in her trembling hands and said words that made no sense to his child's mind. "You deserve better than what I can give you, my darling boy. This man, he will give you a good home, food every day, a real bed, everything I cannot provide. I am doing this because I love you more than my own life." The man she referred to stood several paces away, his face weathered and unreadable beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His name was Joseph Crandall, a rancher from the eastern part of the territory, and he had paid Ethan's mother $30 in silver coins that clinked in her pocket like accusations. Ethan had screamed. He had fought against the rancher's iron grip, had called for his mother until his voice went hoarse, had watched her turn away with her shoulders shaking as the wagon carried him away from everything he knew. He did not understand why love meant abandonment. He did not understand why his mother's tears fell even as she pocketed the money. He understood only that the world had revealed itself to be a cruel and senseless place where the people who were supposed to protect you could simply choose not to. The Crandall Ranch was a harsh education in survival. Joseph Crandall was not an evil man, but neither was he particularly kind. He had purchased Ethan as he might purchase a young horse, an investment that would pay dividends once properly trained. The boy worked from dawn until dusk, mucking stables, mending fences, hauling water from the creek that ran along the property's southern border. He slept in the barn loft on a pile of hay that grew increasingly thin as winter approached. He ate what scraps were left after the ranch hands had their fill, but physical hardship was nothing compared to the wound in his chest that never quite healed. At night, curled beneath a thin blanket that did little to keep out the cold, Ethan would replay that final morning in Montana City. He would examine every word his mother had spoken, turning them over in his mind like river stones, searching for hidden meanings. She had said she loved him. She had said she was doing this for his benefit. Yet she had taken money in exchange for him, had walked away, had never once looked back or tried to find him again. The years passed with grinding slowness. Ethan grew tall and strong, his body hardened by constant labor, his heart hardened by constant questions that had no answers. He spoke little, trusted less, and kept his emotions locked behind walls of stone. The other ranch hands largely ignored him, and he preferred it that way. Connection meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant pain. When he turned 18 in the spring of 1884, Joseph Crandall called him into the main house. It was only the third time Ethan had been inside in 11 years. The rancher sat behind a heavy oak desk, his hair now completely gray, his hands gnarled from decades of hard work. "You have fulfilled your obligation," Crandall said without preamble. "I paid your mother for 10 years of labor and you have given me 11. You are free to go." Ethan stared at him, feeling nothing. Freedom was just another word that meant nothing when you had nowhere to go and no one waiting for you. "There is a town called Birch Creek, about 60 miles northwest of here," Crandall continued, sliding a small leather pouch across the desk. "They are looking for ranch hands. These are your wages for the extra year. $20. It is more than fair." Ethan took the pouch without counting the contents, without thanking the man who had owned him for more than half his life. He walked out of the house, gathered his few belongings from the barn loft, and started walking northwest before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. The journey to Birch Creek took him 4 days on foot, following wagon trails and game paths through the sprawling Montana wilderness. He shot a rabbit on the second day with a rifle he had stolen from the ranch, justifying the theft as partial payment for 11 years of his childhood. He slept under the stars and tried not to think about what he was walking toward, focusing instead on what he was leaving behind. Birch Creek was smaller than Montana City had been, a collection of perhaps 30 buildings clustered around a main street that turned to mud whenever it rained. But it had a saloon, a general store, a church, and most importantly, a large cattle operation run by a man named Samuel Wells, who was indeed looking for experienced ranch hands. Ethan hired on immediately, his years of experience evident in how he handled the horses, how he read the land, how he worked without complaint from sunup to sundown. Samuel Wells was a better employer than Joseph Crandall had been. He paid on time, provided decent meals, and treated his workers like human beings rather than property. Ethan rented a small room above the general store and settled into a life that was, if not happy, at least predictable. 2 years passed. Ethan turned 20. He had grown into a striking man despite his harsh upbringing, with dark hair that fell past his collar, sharp features that women found appealing despite his perpetual scowl, and eyes that held shadows no 20-year-old should carry. He went about his work with mechanical efficiency, saved most of his wages, and avoided emotional entanglements of any kind. Then, in the early summer of 1886, everything changed because of a woman on a stagecoach who had nowhere else to go. Rose Mitchell stepped down from the Denver stage on a Tuesday afternoon, her auburn hair escaping from beneath a modest bonnet, her green eyes taking in Birch Creek with poorly concealed dismay. She carried a single battered trunk and wore a dress that had once been fine, but now showed signs of extensive wear. She was 22 years old, though the last 6 months had aged her considerably. Ethan happened to be in town purchasing supplies when the stage arrived. He noticed her only because she seemed so utterly lost, standing in the middle of the dusty street as the stage pulled away, clearly having no idea where to go next. She turned in a slow circle, clutching a piece of paper in her hand, her expression shifting from confusion to something approaching desperation. Against his better judgment, against every instinct that told him to mind his own business and avoid complications, Ethan found himself walking toward her. "You look lost," he said, his voice rough from disuse. He rarely spoke more than necessary. Rose turned to face him, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other. Later, Ethan would struggle to explain what happened in that moment, how something in his chest that had been frozen for 19 years suddenly cracked just slightly. Later, Rose would tell him that she saw past his walls immediately, saw the wounded boy hiding behind the hard man's exterior. "I am looking for the widow Harrington," Rose said, her voice carrying the cultured tones of someone who had been educated. "I was told she might have a room to let." "Do you know where I might find her?" Ethan nodded toward a small house at the edge of town, painted white with blue shutters. "That is her place, but she died 3 weeks ago. Her son sold the property and moved to Helena." The color drained from Rose's face. She swayed slightly, and Ethan instinctively reached out to steady her elbow. She did not pull away from his touch. "I see," she said quietly. I see, of course. Nothing ever works out as planned, does it? There was such profound weariness in her voice that Ethan found himself asking, Where did you come from? Denver. Before that, St. Louis. Before that, a life that no longer exists. She straightened her shoulders, visibly gathering herself. I am being dramatic. I apologize. I have had a long journey. I will inquire at the boarding house. There is no boarding house in Birch Creek, Ethan said. There is the saloon, but you do not want to stay there. They rent rooms by the hour, if you understand my meaning. Rose's cheeks colored slightly, but she met his gaze directly. Then I suppose I will have to move on to the next town. When does the stage run? Not until Friday. 3 days from now. He watched her absorb this information, watched her glance at her trunk, at the unforgiving landscape surrounding the small town, at the sun beginning its descent toward the western mountains. She had nowhere to sleep for 3 nights, likely very little money, and absolutely no one to help her. These were simple facts, easily observed, and they should not have mattered to him at all. The general store has rooms, he heard himself say. I rent one. I believe there may be another available. Mrs. Carson, who runs the store, is respectable. She will not charge you more than is fair. Relief flooded Rose's face so completely that Ethan felt an unfamiliar tightness in his throat. Thank you, she said. Truly, you are very kind. No one had ever called him kind before. He did not know what to do with the words, so he simply picked up her trunk, despite her protests, and carried it across the street to the general store. Mrs. Carson was indeed willing to rent her second room, though she quoted a price that was higher than what Ethan paid. He saw Rose's face fall, saw her calculating what little money she had, and found himself speaking again before he could stop himself. I will cover the first week, he said. You can repay me when you are able. Both women stared at him. Mrs. Carson's eyes were shrewd and knowing. Rose's were filled with confusion and something that might have been the beginning of hope. I cannot accept such generosity from a stranger, Rose said, but her voice lacked conviction. Then we will not be strangers, Ethan replied. I am Ethan Bradford. Now you know my name, and I am not a stranger anymore. The smallest smile touched Rose's lips, the first he had seen from her. It transformed her face completely, and Ethan had to look away from the sudden brightness of it. Rose Mitchell, she said softly, and I will repay you, I promise I will. He nodded once, set her trunk in the small room beside his own, paid Mrs. Carson for the week, and walked out before either woman could say anything else. His heart was pounding in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. He had just committed an act of kindness, something he had not done in so long he had forgotten what it felt like. It should have made him feel good, he supposed, but instead it left him feeling unsettled and exposed. That evening, as he sat on his bed cleaning his rifle, he heard Rose moving around in the next room. The walls were thin, and he could hear her unpacking her trunk, the soft sounds of her settling into the small space. He tried not to listen, tried not to imagine what her life must have been like to bring her to Birch Creek with only a trunk and desperate hope. He tried not to care. He failed spectacularly at all of it. The next morning, Ethan rose before dawn as always and headed to the Wells Ranch. He worked through the day branding cattle, his mind wandering in ways it rarely did. He found himself wondering if Rose had found breakfast, if Mrs. Carson was treating her well, if she was still planning to leave on Friday's stage. He told himself firmly that it was none of his concern, that he had done his good deed, and that was the end of it. When he returned to town that evening, Rose was sitting on the steps of the general store, watching the sun set over the mountains. She looked up as he approached, and again that smile appeared, small but genuine. "Mr. Bradford," she said in greeting. "Just Ethan," he replied, stopping at the base of the steps. No one calls me Mr. Ethan then. I wanted to thank you again for your help yesterday. Mrs. Carson told me you are not usually so talkative or helpful. She seemed quite shocked by your behavior. Ethan felt his face heat slightly. Mrs. Carson talks too much. Rose laughed, a sound like water over stones. She is lonely, I think. Her husband died 2 years ago and she has no children. She enjoys company. You learned all that in one day. People tell me things, Rose said with a small shrug. I suppose I have a sympathetic face, or perhaps I simply ask the right questions. Ethan found himself sitting down on the steps beside her, something he had not planned to do. The evening air was cooling rapidly, and Rose pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Why did you come to Birch Creek? He asked, surprising himself with the question. He never pried into other people's business. Rose was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was carefully neutral. I was engaged to be married. My fiancé was a banker's son in Denver, very respectable, very proper. 2 months ago, I discovered he was already married with a wife and 2 children in Colorado Springs. When I confronted him, he laughed. He said I should be grateful he had paid me any attention at all, considering my circumstances. What circumstances? The question came out harder than Ethan intended. Rose looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. My father was a doctor, a good one. But he made some poor investments and lost everything. He killed himself 3 years ago. My mother had died when I was young. I had no other family, no money, no prospects. I became a governess for a wealthy family, which is how I met the banker's son. I thought he was my chance at a decent life. I thought he loved me, she laughed bitterly. I was wrong on both counts. So you came here. I had a little money saved. Not much. I remembered my mother once mentioning a friend who had moved to Montana, the widow Harrington. I thought perhaps she might help me find work as a governess or teacher. I thought wrong about that as well, it seems. Ethan understood what it felt like to have every certainty ripped away, to discover that the world was not what you believed it to be. He understood it intimately. Can you cook? He asked abruptly. Rose blinked at the apparent non sequitur. Yes, quite well, actually. Why? The saloon needs someone to cook meals. The last woman who did it left town with a traveling medicine show. The owner, Frank Morrison, has been struggling to manage it himself. The food is terrible and people are starting to complain. If you could cook, you could earn money, enough to either stay or move on to somewhere better. Hope lit Rose's face again, and Ethan felt that strange tightness in his chest return. Do you think he would hire me? Only one way to find out. He stood and offered his hand to help her up. Her hand was small in his, delicate despite obvious calluses from work. She held on perhaps a moment longer than necessary, and Ethan felt the warmth of her palm against his like a brand. They walked to the saloon together as the last light faded from the sky. Frank Morrison was indeed desperate enough to hire Rose on the spot, especially after she described some of the dishes she could prepare. He offered her $3 a week plus 1 meal a day, which was not generous but was better than nothing. Rose accepted immediately, her relief palpable. As they walked back to the general store through the dark streets, Rose said quietly, "You keep helping me. Why?" Ethan considered the question seriously. "I do not know," he admitted. "I am not usually helpful. Ask anyone. Mrs. Carson said you have been here 2 years and rarely speak to anyone. She said you seem determined to be alone. Mrs. Carson really does talk too much. She cares about you, I think, in her way." They had reached the general store. They stood in the darkness, and Ethan could barely make out Rose's features in the dim light from the window above. "I know what it is like," he said finally, the words dragged from somewhere deep inside him. To have nowhere to go, no one to help, it is not a good feeling. Rose reached out and touched his arm gently. No, she agreed softly. It is not. She went inside, and Ethan stood in the darkness for a long time, his arm still warm where she had touched him. Over the following weeks, something shifted in the small town of Birch Creek. Rose began cooking at the saloon, and within days, people were raving about the food. She made hearty stews, fresh bread, roasted meats seasoned with herbs she somehow acquired or grew herself in pots behind the saloon. The place was packed during meal times, and Frank Morrison gave her a raise after only 2 weeks. Ethan found himself eating at the saloon far more often than he ever had before. He told himself it was because the food was genuinely good, which was true. But he knew the real reason was the way Rose's face brightened when she saw him come in, the way she always made sure to bring his plate personally, the way they fell into easy conversation that flowed more naturally than any interaction he had ever experienced. She told him about growing up in St. Louis, about her father's medical practice and her mother's love of music. She told him about learning to cook from their housekeeper, about the books she had read, about her dreams of seeing the ocean someday. She asked him questions too, gentle probings that he found himself answering despite his usual reticence. He told her about the ranch work, about the Montana wilderness, about tracking deer and reading weather patterns. He did not tell her about his mother, about being sold, about the years of working for Joseph Crandall. Those wounds were still too raw, too shameful to expose. Rose stayed in Birch Creek past Friday, then past the next Friday and the one after that. She moved from the general store into a small cottage at the edge of town that had been sitting vacant, using her saved wages to pay the minimal rent. She planted a garden and made curtains from fabric Mrs. Carson sold her at a discount. She became a fixture in the community, known for her warmth, her cooking, and her easy way with people. Ethan watched her bloom like a flower given water after a long drought, and something in him began to thaw despite his best efforts to remain frozen. It was in late August when things between them shifted from friendship to something more. Ethan had been hired to help repair the saloon's back porch, and he was working late into the evening after finishing his regular ranch duties. Rose brought him coffee and sat beside him as he worked, talking about nothing and everything. "Do you ever think about the future?" she asked at one point. "About what you want from life?" Ethan hammered in a nail before answering. "I used to when I was young, not anymore." "Why not?" "Because the future never turns out the way you think it will. Better not to hope for anything, then you cannot be disappointed." Rose was quiet for a moment. "That is a terribly sad way to live, Ethan. Maybe, but it is safe. Safe from what? Happiness." He looked at her then, really looked at her in the fading light. Her auburn hair was pinned up loosely, with tendrils escaping around her face. Her green eyes were serious and searching. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with perfect features and everything to do with inner light. "Safe from pain," he said quietly. "From betrayal, from loss." "Someone hurt you very badly," Rose said. "It was not a question." "Someone you trusted." Ethan turned back to his work, driving nails with more force than necessary. "We all have our stories. Will you ever tell me yours, maybe?" "Someday. When I figure out how to tell it without falling apart." Rose reached over and stilled his hand, preventing him from hammering another nail. Her touch was gentle but firm. "You are stronger than you think you are, Ethan Bradford. I have watched you these past months. You carry weight that would crush most men, and you do it without complaint, without asking for help, without even acknowledging the burden. But you do not have to carry it alone forever." Something in Ethan's chest cracked wider, and before he could think better of it, before he could rebuild his walls, he found himself turning to face her fully. "What if I do not know how to do anything else? What if being alone is all I know? Then you learn something new, Rose said simply. The same way you learned everything else, one day at a time, one step at a time. They sat there in the gathering darkness, hands touching, the air between them charged with possibility. Ethan felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in 19 years. Hope. Fragile, terrifying, but undeniably real. Rose, he said, his voice rough. I am not good at this, at connecting with people, at letting anyone close. I will probably disappoint you or hurt you or push you away. Probably, she agreed with a small smile. And I will probably frustrate you or demand more than you are ready to give or push you when you want to be left alone. We are both damaged in our own ways, Ethan. But maybe we can be damaged together. Maybe that is better than being damaged alone. Ethan kissed her then, a decision made without thought, driven by emotion rather than logic. It was his first kiss in 20 years, and it felt like coming home to a place he had never been. Rose kissed him back with equal parts tenderness and hunger, her hands coming up to frame his face, and Ethan felt the last of his walls beginning to crumble. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. I am still going to disappoint you, he whispered. I am counting on it, Rose whispered back. Life would be boring otherwise. They began courting properly after that, though Ethan's idea of courting was somewhat unconventional. He brought her wild flowers he found in the mountains. He fixed things around her cottage without being asked. He taught her to shoot a rifle, standing behind her with his arms around her, guiding her aim. He sat in the saloon every evening, watching her work, walking her home when she finished. Rose, for her part, fed him meals that actually filled his belly and his soul. She coaxed him into conversations that lasted hours. She introduced him to books she loved, reading passages aloud by lamplight. She kissed him with growing passion and held him with increasing tenderness. She asked for his opinions and valued his thoughts. She made him feel seen in a way no one ever had before. The town watched their relationship develop with interest and approval. Samuel Wells told Ethan he had never seen him smile so much. Mrs. Carson told Rose that Ethan was a good man who deserved happiness. Frank Morrison joked that he was going to lose his best cook to marriage before the year was out. But as autumn approached and their relationship deepened, Ethan knew he would eventually have to tell Rose the truth about his past. She had shared her pain with him openly. He owed her the same honesty, no matter how much it cost him. The opportunity came on a Sunday in late September. They had taken horses from the Wells ranch and ridden up into the mountains to watch the aspen leaves turn gold. They spread a blanket beside a small stream and shared a picnic lunch Rose had prepared. The air was crisp and clean, and the world felt almost impossibly beautiful. After they ate, Rose lay with her head in Ethan's lap while he stroked her hair, both of them content in comfortable silence. Finally, Ethan found the courage to speak. I need to tell you something, he said quietly, about my past, about why I am the way I am. Rose sat up, turning to face him with serious eyes. All right, I am listening. So Ethan told her. He told her about growing up poor in Montana City, about his mother's gaunt face and threadbare dress. He told her about the morning when he was 7 years old, about the man who paid 30 silver coins, about his mother's words about love and doing what was best. He told her about screaming as the wagon pulled away, about years of labor on the Crandall ranch, about sleeping in the barn and eating scraps and working until his hands bled. He told her about the wound that never healed, about spending 19 years trying to understand how love could look like abandonment, how a mother could sell her own child and claim it was for his benefit. He told her about the walls he had built, about the decision to never trust, never connect, never allow himself to be vulnerable again. "And then you stepped off that stage, Coach," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "and everything I thought I knew about myself started to change. You made me want things I had convinced myself I did not need. You made me hope again, and it terrifies me, Rose. It absolutely terrifies me." Rose was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. She reached for his hands, holding them tightly. "Oh, Ethan, I am so sorry. What was done to you was wrong. What your mother did was unforgivable." "She said she loved me," Ethan said, and he could hear the 7-year-old boy in his own voice. "She said she was doing it because she loved me. How can love and cruelty be the same thing? They cannot," Rose said firmly. "Love is not cruel. What she did, whatever her reasons, was a betrayal of the worst kind. You deserved so much better. You deserved a mother who would have starved before selling you. You deserved protection and safety and unconditional love." "Sometimes I wonder if she had a reason," Ethan said. "Some explanation that would make it make sense. Sometimes I want to find her and ask her why, but I am afraid of the answer. What if there was no good reason? What if she simply did not want me anymore?" Rose moved to kneel in front of him, taking his face in her hands the way his mother had done that terrible morning. But where his mother's touch had been farewell, Rose's was promise. "Listen to me, Ethan Bradford. You are worthy of love. You are worthy of devotion. You are worthy of someone who would move heaven and earth to keep you, not someone who would sell you for 30 pieces of silver. Whatever your mother's reasons, whatever her justifications, they say everything about her failures and nothing about your value. How can you be sure?" Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. "Because I love you," Rose said simply. "I love you, and I would never hurt you that way. I love you, and I choose you, and I will keep choosing you every single day for as long as you will let me." Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly he was afraid he might hurt her, but she only held him back just as fiercely. They stayed that way for a long time, wrapped in each other beside the mountain stream, while the aspen leaves fell around them like golden rain. "I love you too," Ethan said finally, the words foreign but true on his tongue. "I did not think I was capable of it anymore, but I do. I love you, Rose Mitchell, and it is the most frightening thing I have ever felt." Rose pulled back just enough to kiss him, deep and sweet and full of promise. "Good," she said against his lips. "Love should be a little frightening. Otherwise, how would you know it was real?" They rode back to Birch Creek as the sun was setting, their horses walking side by side, their hands linked between them. Ethan felt lighter than he had in 19 years, as if telling Rose his story had lifted some of the weight he had been carrying. The pain was still there, the wound still tender, but it no longer felt like it might destroy him. That night, Rose invited him into her cottage for the first time since their relationship had become romantic. They sat together on her small sofa, and she showed him a photograph she had been carrying since leaving Denver. "This is my father," she said, pointing to a stern-looking man in a formal suit. "He was not always a good father. He was distant and demanding and often disappointed in me. But when he lost everything, when he was at his lowest, he did not burden me with his problems. He made sure I was settled with the family who needed a governess before he took his own life. In his way, however flawed, he tried to protect me." She looked up at Ethan with shining eyes. "I tell you this because I want you to understand something. Some parents do terrible things out of love, and some do terrible things out of selfishness, and sometimes it is impossible to tell the difference. Your mother may have believed she was helping you. She may have been desperate beyond imagining, or she may have simply been weak and selfish. You may never know which is true." "How do I live with that uncertainty?" Ethan asked. "By building a life so full of love and purpose that the question stops mattering quite so much. by surrounding yourself with people who choose you every single day, by becoming the kind of man you needed someone to be when you were 7 years old. Rose took his hand. You cannot change what happened to you, Ethan, but you can choose what happens next. Ethan kissed her then, slow and deep, pouring all his gratitude and love and hope into the connection. Rose responded with equal passion, and they spent the evening in each other's arms, talking and kissing and planning a future together that seemed, for the first time in Ethan's life, actually possible. As autumn deepened into winter, Ethan and Rose's relationship continued to flourish. Ethan moved some of his belongings into Rose's cottage, though propriety required him to officially maintain his room at the general store. They spent their evenings together, cooking dinner side by side, reading by the fire, making love with increasing confidence and passion. They spent their Sundays exploring the mountains, even as snow began to dust the higher peaks. Ethan proposed on a cold December evening, offering Rose a simple gold band he had purchased from the traveling jeweler who passed through Birch Creek once a month. It was not expensive or elaborate, but it represented everything he had to give: his heart, his loyalty, his hard-won trust. Rose said yes with tears streaming down her face, and they were married in the small church on Christmas Day, 1886, with Mrs. Carson and Samuel Wells standing as witnesses. Rose wore a new dress of deep blue wool that brought out her eyes. Ethan wore his best shirt and pants, his hair trimmed and his face clean-shaven. They spoke their vows with voices that shook with emotion, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan felt something in his chest finally click into place. A piece of himself he had not known was missing. They spent their wedding night in Rose's cottage, which was now officially their home together. As snow fell softly outside, Rose lay in Ethan's arms and traced patterns on his chest with her fingers. "I want to know everything about you," she said softly. "I want to know every story, every scar, every dream you ever had and every one you have now." "That might take a while," Ethan said, running his hand through her hair. "I am not very good at talking about myself. We have time. We have the rest of our lives. The rest of our lives." The phrase should have terrified Ethan, but instead it filled him with warmth. "Ask me anything," he said. "You want children?" The question struck something deep in Ethan's heart. He had not allowed himself to think about children, about creating a family, about being a father. The concept felt too loaded, too dangerous. How could he be a good father when his own childhood had been so distorted? "I do not know," he admitted. "The idea terrifies me. What if I fail them the way I was failed? What if I do not know how to be the kind of father a child needs?" Rose propped herself up on one elbow to look at him directly. "Ethan, you are one of the kindest, most loyal, most protective people I have ever known. You would die before letting your child come to harm. You would work your fingers to the bone to provide for them. You would love them fiercely and honestly. I have absolutely no doubt that you would be an exceptional father. How can you be so certain? Because I know you. Because I see how you treat me, how you treat the animals at the ranch, how you treat even the people in town who have never particularly been kind to you. Because you break your own heart every day worrying about whether you are good enough, which is exactly what good people do." Ethan pulled her back down against him, holding her close. "If we have children," he said carefully, "I want them to know they are wanted, every single day. I want them to never doubt that they are loved, that they are valued, that nothing in this world would ever make me give them up." "Then that is exactly what we will give them," Rose promised. They began their married life in earnest, falling into rhythms and routines that felt simultaneously new and ancient. Ethan continued working for Samuel Wells, who promoted him to foreman after the previous foreman left for California. The promotion came with better pay and a small house on the edge of the ranch property, which Ethan and Rose happily moved into. It was larger than the cottage in town, with 2 bedrooms and a real kitchen and a porch that overlooked the mountains. Rose continued cooking at the saloon but reduced her hours, using her free time to set up their new home, to plant a larger garden, to involve herself in the community. She joined the ladies' sewing circle, helped organize church socials, and became known as someone who could be counted on when help was needed. Ethan found himself integrating into the community as well, drawn out of his isolation by Rose's warmth and gentle insistence. He helped neighbors with repairs and heavy work. He taught some of the younger ranch hands better techniques for handling horses. He even attended church services with Rose, sitting in the back pew and holding her hand throughout. Life was good. Better than Ethan had ever imagined it could be. But there was still a shadow that lingered, a question that remained unanswered. On quiet nights when Rose was sleeping peacefully beside him, Ethan would lie awake and wonder about his mother. What had become of her? Was she still alive? Did she ever think about the boy she had sold? Did she regret her choice? Or had she moved on without a backward glance? He told himself the questions did not matter, that he had built a new life and new family, and that should be enough. But the 7-year-old boy still living somewhere inside him wanted answers, wanted to understand, wanted to know why. Rose knew he struggled with these thoughts. She never pushed, never demanded that he talk about it, but she made sure he knew she was there whenever he was ready. Her patience was infinite, her understanding boundless. In the spring of 1887, Rose discovered she was pregnant. She told Ethan on a warm April evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach and said, "We are going to be parents. You are going to be a father." Ethan felt every emotion at once: joy, terror, excitement, fear, hope, anxiety. He pulled Rose into his arms and held her while tears he did not know he was capable of crying streamed down his face. "I am going to be a father," he repeated, testing the words. "I am going to have a child. You are going to be wonderful," Rose assured him. "I promise you, Ethan, you are going to be exactly the father this child needs." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Rose bloomed with health, her skin glowing, her energy boundless. Ethan became almost comically protective, insisting she rest more than necessary, forbidding her from lifting anything heavy, hovering constantly. Rose tolerated his anxiety with good humor, knowing it came from a place of deep love and deeper fear. As Rose's belly grew, Ethan found himself thinking even more about his own mother. What had she felt when she was pregnant with him? Had she loved him then, before poverty and desperation twisted everything? Had she held him as a baby and promised him the world, never imagining she would one day trade him for silver coins? One night in late summer, with Rose 8 months pregnant and the baby kicking actively enough to be seen from outside, Ethan finally voiced the thought that had been haunting him. "I want to find her," he said quietly. "My mother. I want to know what happened to her. I want to know why she did what she did." Rose took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Then we will find her. After the baby comes, when I am recovered, we will make the trip to Montana City. We will search for answers together. What if the answers are worse than not knowing? Then we will deal with that together too. But at least you will know. At least you will not spend the rest of your life wondering." Their son was born on an October morning in 1887, arriving quickly and with remarkable ease. Rose labored for only 6 hours before the midwife, Mrs. Patterson from 2 ranches over, handed Ethan a red-faced, furiously crying baby boy. Ethan held his son for the first time with trembling hands, looking down at the tiny face. the miniature fingers that gripped his thumb with surprising strength, the eyes that would eventually turn from blue to green like roses. He felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible, felt love so fierce it was almost painful flood through every part of him. "Hello," he whispered to his son. "Hello, little one. I am your father, and I promise you right now, I will never let anything hurt you. I will never abandon you. I will love you every day of your life, no matter what. You are safe with me. You are wanted. You are loved beyond measure." Rose watched from the bed with tears of joy on her face. "What should we name him?" she asked softly. They had discussed names for months but had never quite decided. Now, looking at his son's face, Ethan knew exactly what the name should be. "Benjamin," he said. "Benjamin Thomas Bradford. My father's name was Thomas," he added, though he had never met the man who had died before Ethan was born. "And Benjamin means son of my right hand. He will be our strength." "Benjamin," Rose repeated, smiling. "It is perfect." Benjamin was a healthy, happy baby who seemed to delight in every aspect of existence. He ate well, slept reasonably, and smiled easily. Ethan was utterly besotted with his son, spending every free moment holding him, talking to him, showing him the world outside their windows. Being a father awoke something in Ethan, something protective and fierce and tender. He understood, finally, what parental love was supposed to look like. It was supposed to be selfless and unconditional. It was supposed to put the child's needs above everything else. It was supposed to be willing to sacrifice anything to keep the child safe and happy, which made what his own mother had done even more incomprehensible. When Benjamin was 3 months old and winter had settled firmly over Montana, Ethan brought up the subject of finding his mother again. "I need to do this," he told Rose as they lay in bed, Benjamin sleeping in his cradle beside them. "I need to know why. Now that I am a father, now that I understand what this love feels like, I need to understand how she could have done what she did." "Then we will go," Rose said simply. "As soon as the weather clears in spring, we will make the trip to Montana City." They spent the winter preparing for the journey. Ethan saved extra money from his wages. Rose made arrangements with Frank Morrison to take an extended leave from the saloon. They purchased a sturdy wagon and a reliable team of horses. Mrs. Patterson agreed to accompany them to help with Benjamin during the travel. When spring finally arrived in 1888, they set out for Montana City on a clear May morning. The journey took nearly 2 weeks, following rough roads and crossing swollen rivers. Benjamin was a remarkably good traveler, seeming to enjoy the constant motion and new sights. Mrs. Patterson proved invaluable, managing the baby while Rose and Ethan handled the driving and camp setup. As they approached Montana City, Ethan felt his anxiety increasing. The town had grown significantly in the 15 years since he had been taken from it. New buildings lined streets that had been mostly empty lots. A railroad spur had been added, bringing commerce and population. It was simultaneously familiar and foreign, a ghost of his memories overlaid with present reality. They rented rooms at a hotel, settling in before Ethan began his search. He started at the general store, asking if anyone remembered a woman named Bradford who had lived in the area 15 years ago. The current owner was new and had no information, but he directed Ethan to the newspaper office, where archives might hold answers. The newspaper editor, an elderly man named Mr. Hawkins, was intrigued by Ethan's search. He pulled out bound volumes of newspapers from the early 1870s, and together they searched through announcements, advertisements, and news items. They found her mentioned in a brief item from August 1873, just a few months after Ethan had been taken. Mrs. Sarah Bradford, lately of Montana City, died tragically in a boarding house fire in Helena. No surviving family. Ethan stared at the words, reading them over and over. His mother was dead. She had been dead for nearly 15 years. He would never get his answers. He would never understand why she had done what she did. The door to his past had just slammed shut permanently. He walked out of the newspaper office in a daze, barely aware of where he was going. Rose found him an hour later sitting beside the creek at the edge of town, staring at nothing. She sat down beside him without speaking, simply taking his hand and waiting. "She died," Ethan said finally. "A few months after she sold me, in a fire in Helena. She is gone, Rose. I will never know why. I am so sorry," Rose said softly. "I thought I would feel something," Ethan continued. "Relief or grief or anger or something. But I just feel empty. She has been dead all this time, and I have been carrying around questions that can never be answered." "Maybe that is your answer," Rose suggested gently. "Maybe the fact that she died so soon after means she was in terrible circumstances. Maybe she was sick or desperate or running from something. Maybe she thought she was saving you from a worse fate. Or maybe she was just selfish and cruel, and I am trying to make it into something better because I cannot accept that my own mother did not love me enough to keep me." Rose squeezed his hand. "You will never know which is true, Ethan. You have to decide which version you want to believe. You have to choose the story that lets you move forward." Ethan thought about that for a long time. Finally, he said, "I choose to believe she was desperate. I choose to believe she thought she was saving me, even though she was wrong. I choose to believe she loved me in her broken way, even though her love was not enough." "That is a generous choice," Rose said. "It is a necessary choice, for my own peace, for Benjamin. I cannot be the father he deserves if I am carrying all this rage and pain. I have to let it go, even if I do not understand it." They stayed in Montana City for 3 more days, and Ethan used the time to visit the cemetery where his mother was buried. The grave was unmarked, lost among dozens of others in the Potter's Field section. Ethan stood there for a long time, Rose beside him with Benjamin in her arms. "I forgive you," Ethan said finally, speaking to the unmarked grave, to the ghost of the mother he barely remembered. "I do not understand what you did, and I cannot pretend it did not hurt me deeply. But I forgive you. I choose to forgive you so I can be free of this weight. I choose to believe you thought you were acting out of love, even though you were wrong. I choose to move forward and be the father to my son that I needed you to be to me." He felt Rose's hand on his back, felt her love and support flowing through her touch. He looked down at Benjamin, peacefully asleep in his mother's arms, and felt his heart swell with protective love. "I am not going to let what happened to me define the rest of my life," Ethan said, more to himself than to anyone else. "I am not going to let one terrible choice made by a desperate woman determine who I am and who I can become. I am choosing differently. I am choosing love. I am choosing family. I am choosing to believe in good things again." They left Montana City the next morning and made the long journey back to Birch Creek. The return trip felt lighter somehow, as if Ethan had left some of his burden at that unmarked grave. He would never have all the answers he wanted, but he had made peace with the questions. Life resumed its normal rhythms when they returned home. Ethan went back to his work at the Wells Ranch, now with renewed purpose. Every dollar he earned was for his family, for the life he was building with Rose and Benjamin. Every fence he mended, every horse he trained, every decision he made was an investment in their future. Rose returned to cooking at the saloon a few hours a day, bringing Benjamin with her in a basket that she kept in the kitchen. The customers loved seeing the baby, and Benjamin thrived on the attention and activity. As Benjamin grew from infant to toddler, Ethan discovered the profound joys of fatherhood. He taught his son to walk, holding his chubby hands as Benjamin took wobbly steps across their front room. He taught him to say Papa and Mama, and his heart swelled every time Benjamin called for him. He played endless games of peek-a-boo and read children's stories in exaggerated voices that made Benjamin shriek with laughter. He also discovered the fears of fatherhood. Every time Benjamin was sick, Ethan was convinced he was dying. Every time Benjamin fell and scraped his knee, Ethan felt the pain as if it were his own. He understood now what it meant to love someone more than yourself, to know that your happiness was permanently tied to another person's well-being. In the fall of 1889, Rose announced she was pregnant again. Ethan's joy was immediate and uncomplicated this time, his confidence in his ability to be a good father much stronger. Their second child, a daughter they named Lily Grace Bradford, was born the following June, arriving on a warm summer evening with the windows open and the smell of roses drifting in from Rose's garden. Ethan held his daughter and felt his heart expand even further, something he would not have believed possible. Lily had dark hair like his and Rose's green eyes, and when she wrapped her tiny hand around his finger, he was lost completely. 2 children, he marveled to Rose as she recovered from the birth. We have 2 perfect children. We are building something beautiful, Rose said, her voice tired but happy. We are creating the family you always deserve to have. Life continued its forward march. Benjamin grew into a bright, energetic boy who asked endless questions and explored everything. Lily grew into a sweet-natured baby who smiled at everyone and rarely cried. Ethan and Rose's love deepened with each passing year, strengthened by shared purpose and mutual devotion. Ethan never forgot his painful past, but it no longer defined him. He had chosen to forgive his mother, not for her sake, but for his own. He had chosen to believe that people could be broken and desperate and still capable of love, even if that love sometimes looked like cruelty. He had chosen to focus on the family he was building rather than the family he had lost. Samuel Wells retired in 1892, selling his ranch to a consortium from back east, but recommending strongly that they keep Ethan on as foreman. The new owners agreed, even raising Ethan's wages in recognition of his value. With the extra income, Ethan was able to buy a small piece of land adjacent to the ranch, where he began building a larger house for his growing family. Rose was pregnant again, this time with twins, though they would not know that until the birth. She managed a third pregnancy with the same grace and health she had managed the previous 2, though she was more tired this time, needing more rest as her belly swelled to impressive proportions. The twins, both boys, were born in January 1893, arriving during a snowstorm that seemed determined to bury Birch Creek under white drifts. They named them James and Joseph, and Ethan joked that they now had enough children to start their own ranch. With 4 young children, life was chaotic and exhausting and utterly wonderful. The house Ethan was building was finished just in time, a spacious structure with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a front porch where the whole family could gather in the evenings. Rose planted extensive gardens and kept chickens. Ethan built a small barn for their horses and a goat that provided milk for the children. Benjamin, now 6 years old, was endlessly helpful with his younger siblings, showing a patience and gentleness that reminded Ethan of Rose. Lily, at 3, was a natural mother to her baby brothers, always wanting to help feed them or sing to them. The twins were demanding but healthy, and while sleepless nights were common, Ethan and Rose tackled parenthood as they tackled everything, together with love and patience and good humor. In the evenings, after the children were in bed, Ethan and Rose would sit on their porch and marvel at what they had built. A family, a home, a life filled with love and purpose and hope. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked Rose one such evening. "Taking a chance on a broken man who did not know how to love." "Not for a single second," Rose replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You were never broken, Ethan. You were wounded. There is a difference. Broken things cannot be fixed. Wounded things can heal, given time and love and patience." "You healed me," Ethan said simply. "You and our children. You gave me a reason to believe in good things again." "We healed each other," Rose corrected. "You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You gave me love when I thought I would never trust a man again. You gave me a family and a purpose and a life beyond my wildest dreams. We saved each other, Ethan. That is what love does." As the years passed, Ethan watched his children grow with a mixture of pride and protective anxiety. Benjamin became a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning. Lily was all sunshine and laughter, making friends wherever she went. The twins were wild and adventurous, constantly getting into trouble but doing it with such charm that it was hard to stay angry with them. Ethan made sure his children knew every day that they were loved, that they were wanted, that nothing in this world would ever make him give them up. He told them stories, played with them, taught them skills, and listened to their dreams. He was present in a way his mother had never been for him, and while the comparison sometimes hurt, it also gave him satisfaction. He had broken the cycle. He had chosen differently. Rose continued to be the heart of their family, the steady presence that kept everything running smoothly. She cooked and cleaned and managed the household with efficiency born of love. She taught their children to read and write before they started formal schooling. She organized community events and helped neighbors in need. She loved Ethan with a devotion that never wavered, even on difficult days when the children were challenging or money was tight or life felt overwhelming. In 1898, when Benjamin was 11, he asked Ethan about his childhood. They were working together in the barn, repairing a stall door when Benjamin said, "Papa, you never talk about when you were my age. What was your life like?" Ethan paused in his work, considering how much to share. His son was old enough to understand some difficult truths, but Ethan did not want to burden him with the full weight of his past. "My childhood was not easy," Ethan said carefully. "I lost my mother when I was very young, and I had to work hard to survive. It made me strong, but it also made me lonely for a long time." "Is that why you are always telling us you love us?" Benjamin asked with the insight of a perceptive child. "Because no one told you." Ethan set down his tools and looked at his son directly. "Yes," he admitted, "that is exactly why. I want you and your siblings to never doubt that you are loved. I want you to know in your bones that you are valued and wanted and important to me. Because I did not always feel that way when I was young, and it hurt more than any physical pain ever could." Benjamin thought about this for a moment, then moved to hug his father tightly. "I do know, Papa, we all know, you show us every day." Ethan held his son, feeling tears prick his eyes. This was healing, he realized. This moment, this connection, this proof that he had succeeded in being the father he had needed so desperately when he was 7 years old. His mother's betrayal had not destroyed him. It had shaped him, yes, but he had chosen what shape that would take. He had chosen love over bitterness, connection over isolation, hope over despair. In 1900, as a new century dawned, Ethan and Rose celebrated their 13th wedding anniversary surrounded by their 4 children, now aged 12, 10, and 7 for the twins. They had built a good life in Birch Creek, a life filled with honest work, deep friendships, and profound love. Ethan was 42 years old now, his hair showing threads of gray, his face lined from years of sun and wind and hard work. But his eyes, which had once been so shadowed, now held warmth and contentment. He had long since forgiven his mother, had made peace with never understanding her choices, had chosen to focus on the family he had created rather than the family he had lost. Rose was 44, still beautiful, her auburn hair now streaked with silver, her figure softer after bearing 4 children. But she remained the center of Ethan's universe, the woman who had saved him from a life of isolation and bitterness. They had grown old together, their love deepening with each passing year, their bond strengthened by shared challenges and shared joys. Their children were thriving. Benjamin was talking about becoming a teacher, wanting to help other children learn and grow. Lily dreamed of being a writer, filling notebooks with stories and poems. James and Joseph were still figuring out their paths but showed talent with animals, particularly horses. As Ethan looked at his family gathered around the dinner table one Sunday evening, laughing and talking over each other in the comfortable chaos of a full house, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. His mother had sold him when he was 7, claiming it was an act of love. For 19 years, that betrayal had poisoned his ability to trust, to connect, to believe in good things. But then Rose had stepped off a stagecoach with nowhere to go, and everything had changed. She had shown him what real love looked like: patient, kind, devoted, unconditional. She had given him the courage to risk his heart again, to believe that not everyone would betray him, to hope that happiness was possible. Together, they had built something beautiful. They had created a family based on love and respect and unwavering commitment. They had raised children who knew they were valued, who felt safe and protected, who understood that love was not about words but about actions, about showing up every day, about choosing each other again and again. "What are you thinking about?" Rose asked quietly, noticing Ethan's contemplative expression. "About how lucky I am," Ethan replied, taking her hand. "About how that 7-year-old boy standing in Montana City never could have imagined this life. About how glad I am that you were stubborn enough to see past my walls and patient enough to wait for me to learn how to love." "I would wait 1,000 years for you," Rose said, squeezing his hand. "You were worth every moment of patience, every risk, every leap of faith." As the evening wore on, and the children gradually dispersed to their various activities, Ethan and Rose sat together on their porch as they had done countless times before. The Montana sky was brilliant with stars, the air cool and clean, the sounds of their children's laughter drifting through the open windows. "You think she would be proud?" Ethan asked suddenly. "My mother, I mean. Do you think she would be proud of the man I became, of the family I built?" Rose considered the question seriously. "I think she would be amazed," she said finally. "I think she would look at you and our children and this life you have created, and she would understand that despite the terrible choice she made, you found your way to happiness anyway. You overcame what she did to you. You chose differently. You broke the cycle." "I hope so," Ethan said quietly. "I hope that somewhere, somehow, she knows that her son survived, that he more than survived, that he built something beautiful out of the ashes of that terrible day." "She knows," Rose said with certainty. "Wherever she is, whatever happens after we die, she knows. And I think she is grateful that you found the strength to forgive her, even though she did not deserve it." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, hearts beating in rhythm. The years ahead would bring more challenges and more joys. Their children would grow up and have families of their own. Ethan and Rose would become grandparents, would watch their legacy continue into future generations. They would grow old together, their love only deepening with time. But in that moment, sitting on their porch under a canopy of stars, they were simply two people who had found each other when they both desperately needed to be found. Two wounded souls who had chosen to heal together. Two hearts that beat as one. Benjamin appeared in the doorway, 8-year-old Joseph riding on his back, both of them laughing. "Papa, will you tell us a story before bed?" Ethan smiled, standing and pulling Rose up with him. "Of course. What kind of story do you want to hear?" "A happy one," Joseph said immediately. "With a good ending." "A happy one with a good ending," Ethan repeated, looking at Rose with love in his eyes. "I think I know exactly the story to tell." He gathered his family in the front room, Rose settling into her favorite chair with Lily curled up beside her, the boys sprawling on the floor at Ethan's feet. And as the fire crackled in the hearth and the Montana night deepened around their home, Ethan told them a story. It was a story about a boy who lost everything but found it again in unexpected ways. It was a story about a woman who took a chance on a broken man and helped him heal. It was a story about choosing love over fear, hope over despair, connection over isolation. It was a story about building a family and a home and a life worth living. It was, in short, the story of his life, and it had the happiest ending he could have ever imagined. As he finished the story and tucked his children into their beds, kissing each one goodnight and reminding them that they were loved, Ethan felt a profound sense of peace. The 7-year-old boy who had been sold for 30 silver coins had grown into a man who understood the true value of love. The wounds had healed into scars that reminded him of his strength rather than his pain. He climbed into bed beside Rose, pulling her close, and whispered into the darkness, "Thank you for saving me." "Thank you for letting me," Rose whispered back, kissing him softly. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, their children safe in nearby rooms, their home filled with love and laughter, their future bright with promise. The past would always be part of Ethan's story, but it no longer defined him. He had written a new ending, one filled with love and family and hope, and it was, without question, a happy ending. The years continued to roll by with the steady rhythm of seasons changing and children growing. By 1905, Benjamin was 18 and had indeed become a teacher, taking a position at the small schoolhouse in Birch Creek. Ethan and Rose sat in the audience on his first day, pride shining from their faces as they watched their eldest son stand before a classroom of eager students. Lily, now 15, had filled dozens of notebooks with her stories and poems. She sent some of her work to a magazine in Helena, and to the family's collective delight, they published one of her short stories, paying her $5 for the privilege. She used the money to buy presents for her younger brothers, her generous nature evident in everything she did. The twins, James and Joseph, were 12 now and already taller than their mother. They worked with Ethan at the ranch after school, showing natural skill with horses and cattle. They talked about starting their own ranch someday, perhaps expanding into breeding horses specifically. Ethan was now 47, his body still strong from years of hard work, but showing the wear of time. His hands were calloused and scarred, his face deeply lined from sun and weather, but he wore his age with pride. Every gray hair, every wrinkle, every ache in his joints was evidence of a life fully lived, of years spent building something meaningful. Rose had turned 49, her auburn hair now more silver than red, her face soft with the wisdom of years. She had retired from cooking at the saloon 2 years earlier, wanting to spend more time at home, to focus on her garden and her family, to write letters to the children who were beginning to venture out into the world. One evening in late summer, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Rose said, We did it, you know. We built exactly the life we dreamed of. We did more than that, Ethan replied, taking her hand. We built something better than I could have ever imagined. You gave me a family, Rose. You gave me a home. You gave me a reason to believe in love and goodness and hope. You gave me everything. We gave each other everything, Rose corrected gently. That is what partnership means. That is what love means. Not one person saving the other, but two people building something together that neither could have built alone. Benjamin came out onto the porch, now a young man rather than a boy, his resemblance to Ethan striking. I have some news, he said, his face a mixture of excitement and nervousness. I have been courting Sarah Whitmore, the banker's daughter. I would like to ask her to marry me, but I wanted your blessing first. Ethan stood and embraced his son. You have my blessing and my joy. Sarah is a wonderful young woman. You have chosen well. I learned from the best, Benjamin said, looking between his parents. I watched how you and Mama love each other, how you respect each other, how you work together. I want that kind of marriage. I want to build that kind of life. Rose was crying happy tears, hugging her son tightly. You will, she assured him. You have learned well. You will be a wonderful husband, just as you are a wonderful son. Benjamin married Sarah in the spring of 1906, and the whole town turned out for the celebration. Ethan watched his son exchange vows with his bride and felt the weight of legacy settling on his shoulders. This was what breaking the cycle looked like. This was proof that the decisions he and Rose had made, the love they had poured into their children, had created ripples that would extend into future generations. A year later, Benjamin and Sarah welcomed their first child, a son they named Ethan Thomas, after both his grandfather and great-grandfather. When Ethan held his first grandchild for the first time, he wept openly, overwhelmed by the miracle of it all. This baby represented everything his 7-year-old self had never believed possible: family, legacy, love that transcended pain and created something beautiful. Hello, little one, Ethan whispered to his namesake. Welcome to a family that will love you fiercely and protect you completely. Welcome to a legacy of choosing love over fear. Welcome home. Rose stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, tears streaming down her face. We are grandparents, she marveled. We have grandchildren. The first of many, I suspect, Ethan said with a smile, looking at Lily, who was now 17 and had her own suitor, at the twins who were growing into fine young men who would surely marry someday. Life continued its beautiful forward momentum. Lily married a journalist from Helena in 1908 and moved to the city, where she pursued her writing with his full support and encouragement. She published her first novel in 1910, a romance set in the Montana wilderness that drew heavily on her parents' love story, though she changed names and details to protect their privacy. The twins both married within a year of each other, James to a rancher's daughter from the neighboring county, Joseph to a schoolteacher who had come west from Boston. By 1912, Ethan and Rose had 7 grandchildren and more on the way. They sold their ranch property to James and Joseph, who combined it with adjacent land to create the breeding operation they had dreamed about. Ethan and Rose moved into a smaller house in Birch Creek itself, wanting to be closer to town as they aged, wanting the convenience of having the doctor and general store within easy walking distance. Ethan retired from ranch work at 55, his body finally demanding rest after nearly 5 decades of hard labor. But retirement did not mean idleness. He helped his sons at their ranch when they needed extra hands. He taught his grandchildren to ride horses and track deer and read the weather in the clouds. He sat on the porch of the general store with other retired men, swapping stories and solving the world's problems. Rose took up painting in her later years, surprising everyone with her natural talent. She painted scenes from their life together, their wedding day, their children as babies, the ranch house they had built, the Montana mountains at sunset. She gave these paintings to their children and grandchildren, visual representations of the love that had built their family. In 1920, as they approached their 34th wedding anniversary, Ethan and Rose sat together in the small garden behind their townhouse. They were both in their 60s now, moving slower, seeing less clearly, hearing less sharply. But their love remained as strong as ever, perhaps stronger for having weathered decades of life together. "You have any regrets?" Rose asked, a question she had asked before at various points in their life together. "Only that I wasted 19 years being afraid to let anyone close," Ethan replied, giving the same answer he always gave. "But even that led me to you, so perhaps it was not wasted after all." "I regret trusting the wrong man in Denver," Rose said, also giving her familiar answer. "But if I had not, I would never have come to Montana. I would never have met you, so perhaps that pain had a purpose as well." They sat in companionable silence, holding hands as they had done for more than 3 decades. Their children were thriving, building their own families and pursuing their own dreams. Their grandchildren were healthy and happy, growing up in homes filled with love and stability. The legacy Ethan and Rose had built together would extend far beyond their own lifetimes. "I forgave her," Ethan said suddenly. "My mother. I chose to forgive her and believe she thought she was saving me, but you know what I have realized over the years." "What?" Rose asked softly. "It does not matter whether she thought she was saving me or not. It does not matter whether she loved me or not, because I saved myself. With your help, yes, but ultimately I made the choice to heal, to love, to build something good. She sold me, but she did not define me. I defined myself." Rose squeezed his hand. "That is perhaps the wisest thing you have ever said." "I had a good teacher," Ethan replied, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. They grew old together with grace and gratitude, their love a testament to the power of choosing hope over despair, connection over isolation, forgiveness over bitterness. When Ethan died peacefully in his sleep in 1928 at the age of 70, Rose was beside him, holding his hand as she had done for 42 years of marriage. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched. His children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, former ranch hands he had mentored, townspeople he had helped, students Benjamin had taught who had heard stories about the remarkable grandfather who had overcome so much. Benjamin gave the eulogy, speaking of a man who had been wounded deeply as a child, but who had chosen to build rather than destroy, to love rather than hate, to create beauty out of ashes. He spoke of a father who had shown him what unconditional love looked like, what devotion meant, what legacy truly mattered. "My father's mother sold him when he was 7 years old," Benjamin said, his voice strong despite his grief. "She claimed it was an act of love, though he spent most of his life trying to understand how that could be true. That single act could have destroyed him. It could have made him bitter and cruel and isolated. But instead, with my mother's help, he transformed that pain into purpose. He became the father he had needed. He built the family he had deserved. He created a legacy of love that will extend through generations." Rose lived for another 3 years, spending her final years surrounded by children and grandchildren who loved her fiercely. She painted until her hands could no longer hold a brush. She wrote letters until her eyes could no longer focus on the page. She loved until her heart finally gave out on a spring morning in 1931, exactly 45 years after she had stepped off that stagecoach in Birch Creek with nowhere to go. She was buried beside Ethan, their graves marked with a simple stone that read, Ethan and Rose Bradford. They chose love. They built a legacy. They lived well. Their children gathered after the funeral, sitting together in the home Ethan and Rose had shared, surrounded by paintings and photographs and memories of a love story that had defined all their lives. They gave us everything, Lily said, looking at Rose's paintings of their family history. They gave us an example of what love should look like. They gave us stability and security and unconditional devotion. They gave us a foundation to build our own lives upon. Papa could have been destroyed by what his mother did, James added, but he chose differently. He chose to love us fiercely, to build something beautiful, to break the cycle of pain. That is his true legacy, Joseph agreed. Not the land or the money or the things he left behind. His legacy is in how he loved Mama, how he raised us, how he taught us that our past does not have to define our future. Benjamin stood and raised a glass. To Mama and Papa, to two people who found each other when they both desperately needed to be found. To a love that transformed pain into purpose. To a legacy that will outlive us all. To Mama and Papa, the others echoed, raising their glasses, and in that moment, in that gathering of the family Ethan and Rose had built together, their story reached its truest ending. Not in death, but in the love that continued beyond them. Not in endings, but in beginnings. Not in what was lost, but in everything that had been found. Ethan's mother had sold him for 30 silver coins, claiming it was an act of love. That betrayal had shaped him, wounded him, nearly destroyed him. But through Rose's love, through his own courage, through the family they built together, that pain had been transformed into something beautiful. The boy who had been abandoned became the man who never abandoned anyone. The child who had questioned if he was loved became the father who made sure his children never doubted their value. The wounded soul became the healer. That was the truth that shattered the boy's life and remade it into something extraordinary. That was the story that began with pain but ended with love. That was the legacy that would echo through generations, proving that while we cannot choose what happens to us, we can always choose what we become because of it. And Ethan Bradford, with Rose Mitchell Bradford by his side, had chosen love. Again and again and again, he had chosen love. And that choice had made all the difference.